So, our next speaker is Dave Pellowe. Dave is basically a political commentator. He has first-hand political experience. He's ran a successful election campaign for the Liberals, winning off a safe ALP seat, and he's also served on Family First executives in many elections. Now he's independent of any party, and he's a political commentator with a blog and YouTube channel called Pellowe Talk. Now, Dave's going to speak to us on the heavy topic of abortion, which is particularly relevant in his home state of Queensland at the moment. So if you give Dave a welcome.
G'day everyone. Thanks for coming out. This is really exciting. There's this many people who are interested in representing Jesus in our society. Thank you to the team and committee who've put this together and volunteers. It's really, really great to see so many hands making light work and a full room. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. I am actually greatly encouraged whenever I see Christians taking an active interest in the welfare of and justice for their neighbours, and humbled whenever I'm invited to help encourage them in that pursuit. In my home state of Queensland, we have no upper house, no meaningful checks and balances. The Queensland government recently legislated one of the worst abortion laws in the world, following almost exactly the Victorian pattern of callous disregard for the fundamental and foundational human right to life upon which all other human rights necessarily rely. Their campaign for grossly liberalising the deliberate and intentional killing of living human beings was marked by tokenistic lip service to the democratic processes and the will of the people. Having spectacularly failed twice to liberalise abortion last year, the Queensland government went through the motions of referring the existing laws, which rightly put the act of killing unborn children in the criminal code, to the Queensland Law Reform Commission. Now, you need to understand what law reform commissions have become in each state. It's become a way of getting unelected people who claim to be experts to make decisions about public policy. Elected politicians then get to shift responsibility for social leadership to the so-called experts and claim the sober responsibility of following their expert advice. They also get to point the finger at politicians who disagree with the Law Reform Commission's advice and cynically condemn them as closed-minded ideologues who simply have an agenda which is immune to argument, hypocritically. Very few people in each state have any idea which personalities are appointed to the Law Reform Commissions. As such, these unelected technocrats have little to no price to pay when they are wrong, even fatally wrong. The worst decisions are often made by people who pay no price for being wrong. These law reform commissions have almost no accountability, as so few members of the public even know the names or faces of those who wield such immense power in public policy. They are appointed by politicians who only want advice and recommendations which is convenient to their agenda. Their advice may be sincerely given, but their advice is usually predictable and an unadmitted qualification for their selection by the politicians who need seemingly objective assistance in selling their own agendas. And so it was in Queensland. The Labor government produced two shockingly bad pieces of legislation last year and withdrew them before they could be voted on in the face of certain and humiliating defeat. Instead of facing the music, they strategically retreated and went through the charade of asking for the Law Reform Commission's recommendations. To absolutely no one's surprise, the Commission recommended that abortion be taken out of the criminal code. The draft laws were then reviewed by another sham, a parliamentary committee process which was stacked with Labor Green leftists, and its outcome was also highly predictable. A ringing endorsement of abortion laws which made it legal to kill your baby for any reason at any stage of pregnancy, only requiring a second doctor's agreement after 22 weeks. By the way, both doctors can be abortionists who stand to profit from the procedure. The second opinion can even be obtained with nothing more than an email or a phone call. And if the abortionist wants to kill a 40-week-old baby without a second doctor's opinion, the legislation makes absolutely no provision for any kind of legal consequence, making the requirement in the law itself completely ineffective. The rhetoric put forward by the pro-abortion choice campaign was that women should not be criminalised for having an abortion. They repeated this line over and over, and I do happen to agree. But the laws as they were had never, ever convicted a single woman for having an abortion since they were created in 1899. Not in 119 years had a woman been criminalised for having an abortion. This was legislation to solve a problem that did not exist. They also claimed that abortions should be easier to access for women. Yet a modestly estimated 14,000 children per year are already being killed in Queensland abortion clinics. That's nearly 2 classrooms a day. How hard can it be if we are killing that many children per day every day of the year? The only places where abortions are hard to come by are places where decades of Labor government in Queensland have reduced public maternity services in remote areas, removing them all things like even ultrasounds to regional centres. Every single argument put forward for liberalising abortion was heavily reliant on misrepresenting facts and euphemisms. They called it decriminalising abortion instead of liberalising abortion to pretend their law was important to the uncertain legal futures of women having abortions. But if we assume the current average of 14,000 years this law was in place, exactly 0 out of more than 1.6 million abortions resulted in criminal convictions. Any reasonable person would say there is therefore no legal uncertainty for women seeking an abortion in Queensland, despite it being in the criminal code. The thing that should make us mad is when such socially critical issues are debated with complete deception and disguise of the facts. The fact is that all animal life starts at conception, and that is why endangered species also have their unborn babies protected in law. It's illegal to hunt sea turtles, and it's illegal to harvest their eggs for breakfast. Quite clearly, the law recognises that doing so is destruction of a protected life. Yet this blatantly obvious fact is blithely ignored by the pro-abortion choice activists with language describing abortion, the intentional act of killing an unborn baby, as women's reproductive health, as was the headline in a Sydney Morning Herald editorial on 20th of October this year. Sorry, but that's a lie. Enough with the euphemisms already. Let's be honest about the reality we're debating here. The facts don't care about your feelings. And if you care about justice at all, you need to care about the facts more. Life has already been reproduced. Reproductive rights are exercised at the moment of intercourse. And if you want a choice in reproduction, that's when you should be making better choices. You are not an animal. You can control your instincts. Demanding the right to kill an unborn baby is not reproductive, it's destructive. It's destroying a life that has already begun. The full headline in the Herald read, "New South Wales is a national dinosaur on women's reproductive health." Here's another really bad argument from the left. Old laws are bad laws. They ran this line in Queensland too. Hashtag it's not 1899, the year the abortion was put in the criminal code. They listed laws from the same year which made no sense in a modern world, falsely equating the defence of human life from cold-blooded murder with laws which now seem silly. But laws against murder of adults are also old, aren't they? If not older, and they still make sense in a modern world. The fact again is that because of the modern world, we now have far more knowledge and scientific evidence of the life and humanity of those little ones in the womb, and the laws from 1899 make more sense now than they ever did then. The abortion laws in Victoria and now Queensland are soon to be laws here in New South Wales. If people like you, people of conscience and Christian conviction, remain silent, the people these laws will oppress the mums, the dads, the grandparents who will never see, meet, and hold close their little one. These people are your neighbours, the people Jesus commanded us to love. Luke Foley is quoted as recently saying that asking the New South Wales Law Reform Commission to review the abortion laws, quote, is signalling that under a future Labor government, the long-standing illegality around these laws would be removed, end quote. Here's what these oppressive laws will look like when the New South Wales Law Reform Commission makes its recommendations and the allegedly Catholic Premier Luke Foley announces his legislation, if Labor is successful on the 23rd of March next year. Abortion will be legalised for any reason, up to 5 or 6 months and up to full term with a second doctor's agreement. This includes gender selection. For example, if a married couple who are trying to have a son wants to kill their unborn healthy girl, they will be able to. This includes if a couple feels like a baby would be inconvenient to their career or investment plans. Girls under 16 will not need parental consent to have an abortion. If the clinic staff suspect the uncle or other person bringing her in for an abortion of child sexual assault, there will be no obligation to report to authorities. If a Christian doctor refuses to be associated in any way with killing children, she will not have to do it herself, but she will be forced by law to provide a referral to an abortionist she knows will. This is like forcing someone who's opposed to the injustice of slavery to hand out business cards for the local slave market and calling it freedom of conscience. They actually called it freedom of conscience in Queensland. It's another leftist lie, a spoonful of sugar to help the poison go down. The counselling offered in abortion clinics often amounts to little more than asking the woman if she really wants to do this. I know post-abortive women who weren't even given that. Independent counselling will not be required for women seeking an abortion under next year's New South Wales laws liberalising abortion, but will be provided by the same clinic with a financial interest in killing her baby. This blatant conflict of interest will pave the way for a significant mental health harm to the woman, permitting the death of the child women are so hardwired to protect, women the law presumes to protect from bad health outcomes. No funding will be made available for women making any choice other than abortion. No funding will be made available to women needing therapy and counselling for post-abortion PTSD, which is experienced for years and even decades after the death of her son or daughter. At a certain stage of development, modern medicine can perform complex heart surgery on a fetus in the womb. It's not 1899. Of course, the baby is anaesthetised, so it won't feel any pain. But the coming New South Wales law will not require pain relief for a baby being aborted at a pain-capable stage of development, as it's not in Queensland. Its skull will be crushed and its limbs will be torn off its body and withdrawn from the birth canal one by one and carefully set aside to be counted in case any pieces of this new person are left inside that place which should be the safest on the planet and become instead a decaying source of infection. The most effective way of preventing this heinous law and any variation thereof is to prevent the election of a government with this agenda of oppression and to elect senators that will unconditionally guarantee to block it. Abortion laws do need reform. Reforms which protect women and young girls from coercion by their family or abusers. Reforms which mandate independent counselling, cooling off periods, and genuine choices by funding pregnancy support, which far too many women lack. Please tell me this. What kind of Christian can remain silent while more than 50 children a day are murdered in New South Wales abortion clinics? That's the current rate. What education policy immigration policy, employment policy, economic policy, tax policy, welfare policy, environmental policy is more important than the injustice of legalising the wholesale slaughter of unborn children in your home state? What kind of Christian votes for their own pocket first, or for trees, while the same party or candidate they prefer for indulgent reasons is intending on supporting laws which liberalise abortion? Is 20,000 dead children a year in New South Wales not enough? What kind of Christian doesn't care enough to even ask the candidates in their electorate if they will promise to fight for the fundamental human right to life from conception to natural death if elected? Do not be afraid of the criticism of the world, which preaches the heresy that Christians should not judge. Be very afraid of the criticism of our Lord, who said, "Do not judge according to appearance, but look beneath the surface. Judge with righteous judgment." John 7:24, if you're looking for that one. Jesus was very political. Remembering his specific mission wasn't to oppose or establish an earthly government in his first coming. He was nonetheless very engaged with and critical of the social leaders and lawmakers of his day. It wasn't religion he was opposed to. It wasn't even the Pharisees, remembering the welcome he gave the sincere questions of Nicodemus the Pharisee. It was injustice that got him mad. Manipulation of power for personal agendas at the expense of the vulnerable masses was what he hated. I'm often told we should be known for what we're for instead of what we're against. But I'm telling you, everyone knows what Jesus was against. He was against oppression. He was against the exploitation of the poor, against fatherlessness, against hypocrisy, against lawmakers pretending to be doing good on the surface while being full of death and decay in their agenda. And he was certainly not above calling them out for their wickedness. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes were very similar to our major and minor political parties, which were always disagreeing with each other. Ancient Israel was a theocracy, and the religious elites were the political elites. They made the laws and told people how to live. They implemented human laws and harsh punishments, and just like modern parliaments, they kept adding layer upon layers of law. Even in the Roman occupation, the Romans left Israel to be largely self-governed. So when Jesus called the Pharisees a brood of vipers, he was directly confronting the political leaders for their public danger. It was outrageous when he told them their father was the devil, and when he described their characters as being like a box of dead men's bones on the inside with a fresh whitewash of paint on the outside covering up their corruption. Do not ever tell me Jesus was not interested in politics or isn't still today. Let's look at some scriptures about how people who aspire to have God's heart of compassion and love will also have God's heart for justice and peace for our neighbours. And let's start with the one on this meeting's flyer, and it's on the wall there as well. Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless and plead for the widow." How can you read that verse and not see an explicit instruction to proactively engage in the fight against the intentional killing of an unborn child or the harm that abortion has on its mother? Never mention the Marxist phrase social justice to me if the fight against abortion is not front and centre in your Christian mission to do good and seek justice and rebuke oppressors. What is the point of democracy, of political parties, or even of elections if we, the people of God, the conscience of the state, are not leading the conversations and campaigns for a more righteous, a more just, and a more safe society? It was not Muslims or atheists who led England and then America and the world in the abolition of the global slave trade and domestic markets for slavery. It was Christians. It was Christian politicians and politicians with Christian convictions, supported by armies of Christians who were not personally called to a career in politics, who rebuked the oppressor and said no more treating living humans like disposable property, a possession you own. It is not a woman's body that ends up violently dismembered in the abortionist's cold stainless steel bucket. It is a new, unique, living human with human rights, full of dignity and inherent value, deserving of equality and justice under natural law. It must be Christians again who lead the campaign to convict the social conscience of the grave depravity of child sacrifice on the altar of personal autonomy. It must be Christians who rebuke those seeking to oppress women and children with a corrupt agenda of death, with a thin veneer of whitewash in attempts to deceive the public. Another verse, Proverbs 31, 8-9 says, it commands believers in the one true God to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. How could we even begin to think we love our neighbours if we remain silent and inactive in a society that is campaigning to kill them? When Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, it was to illustrate who we are meant to love. In the parable, a man who was probably despised by the person he was helping was interrupted on his journey to do something and be somewhere else. He wasn't called to a ministry of roadside assistance. You might not be called to politics, but loving your neighbour means occasionally allowing yourself to be inconvenienced and your plans to be interrupted. The solution the Good Samaritan offered wasn't prayer. I'm exhausted beyond description of hearing Christians make excuses for their disinterest in politics with feebly pious explanations of how they're called to pray while others act. The solution needed in loving our neighbours, like the Good Samaritan, in addition to fervent prayer, is inserting ourselves into the solution. No one is exempt. Like him, we have to invest our precious time, our physical effort, our financial resources, and take a long-term interest. Read the story again. Loving your neighbour like Jesus taught us in the parable of the Good Samaritan looks like this. Someone, even though he was busy doing something else, helps a total stranger who probably hates him by investing his time, his effort, his money into the solution needed and taking a long-term interest in the outcome. You have nearly 8 million neighbours in New South Wales. 8 million people you are called to love practically and to take a long-term interest in. There is no more effective way of practically helping that many people at once than through politics. It is good laws that help and bad laws that oppress. It's only every second year that you're likely to have a state or federal election. It's only every second year that you have a chance to make immediate differences to the justice and peace of your neighbours. Extreme trade unionists who care about penalty rates and radical environmentalists who care about carbon dioxide will usually be more active and more passionate about the issues they perceive to be critical at each election than the vast majority of Christians who stay at home on election day or do little more than vote. Our lawns are sometimes more important on that one Saturday than the inconvenience or discomfort of loving our millions of neighbours by helping good men and women get elected to our parliaments. The first practical thing every Christian should be doing to love their neighbours with this marvellous opportunity of a liberal, inclusive democracy is enrol to vote. But that is just the beginning and nowhere near enough. Your vote is your voice, and the first loyalty you must have as a Christian is to Jesus Christ, not the Liberal Party or any other party or person. The question we must answer, each according to the leading of the Holy Spirit in us, is if Jesus were voting in our electorate, what issues would he consider the most important? Let me make this very clear. We need a revolution and reformation in our political system. And the old way of voting, like lemmings, has gotten us to the fundamentally broken governments and society we now suffer. Political parties are not relevant to who you vote for. You are not electing a premier, a prime minister, or a party. You are electing a local representative of you to a parliament. He or she must represent you and your values. The only time a party becomes relevant is when the candidates in your seat are indistinguishable from each other on the critical issues Jesus is interested in. Now, this is important too. Your candidate's job is not to be a pastor. His or her policies are the most important thing, not what he or she's doing on Sunday morning or if they're in church. This Christian form of identity politics, voting for people who look like us, got us political disasters like allegedly Christian Kevin Rudd, who openly rejected the authority of Scripture and supported undefining marriage. Contrast self-described atheist Julia Gillard, who in office defended the timeless institution of marriage. And we can see that voting for someone simplistically because they claim to be a Christian is a recipe for getting the opposite of what you wanted. In order to find the candidate in your electorate who best represents your values, regardless of party or leader, you have to actually ask them. This is as simple as sending them an email. And so simple, you should be emailing every single candidate in your electorate and asking them questions which will sort the sheep from the wolves. What issue could be so revealing in state elections other than the fundamental human right to life from conception to natural death? Some candidates will have a predictable response. But if every Christian in every electorate asks every candidate in every election to fight for the right to life, it will only be a matter of time before it becomes an essential campaign issue and the injustice is consigned to the dustbin of history. Once socially acceptable, slavery is now not even a question that needs to be asked of candidates. With roughly 56,000 voters in each electoral district in New South Wales, a bit over half claim to be Christian. Imagine if 30,000 people emailed each candidate and said, if you want my vote, you need to be pro-life. What if just 1,000 people committed to faithfully represent Christ in democracy emailed each candidate with an email that read something like this? Dear Sir, Ma'am, I am an undecided voter and am looking for the candidate that represents me best so I can help them win this election. In addition to getting my vote, I would like to let you put your campaign sign in my front yard or on my fence, as well as to donate what I can to your campaign, as well as volunteer to help you for a few hours on election day or at pre-polling. The candidate who represents me best will be able to promise to fight for the fundamental and self-evident human right to life from conception to natural death. I would be very grateful if you would represent me this way, and thank you for your willingness to serve our democracy in any case. There are other issues I feel strongly about, but this one is certainly a deal breaker for me as a concerned voter. Warm regards, a voter in your district. I've been on campaign teams. You're struggling to get 100 volunteers in a state election. If 1,000 people volunteer to help you out on election day, you got it made in the shade, especially in a tight seat. In a tight seat, that makes all the difference, and they will work for you. That's actually their job. They will change their policies to represent their electorate because they don't get to do anything if they're not elected. Now, as I said, there are a bunch of fringe extremists in and standing for government who do not believe a fetus is a living human with inherent value and inalienable, transcendent human rights such as life. But there are a whole lot more who would be willing to do whatever it takes reasonably to get 1,000 new donors and volunteers for their campaigns. But how many do we need in each electorate to create a pro-life government who will defend justice and the peace of our neighbours? Just one. Just one candidate from any party. And we can fulfil what I believe is a minimum requirement of the debt of love we have to 8 million neighbours and abolish the Holocaust of our generation, abortion. Another thing, how to vote cards, which are just a party's suggestion on what your voting preferences should be, are for people too lazy to do the groundwork required for such an important decision. Decide your own order of voting preferences based on the candidate's responses to your email. No reply is always a negative reply. Far too many people put more effort into choosing their white goods or next car than they do understanding the values and policies of the people who will decide whether the laws of justice or oppression will mark our next government. That is lazy stewardship to be repented of. The people of God must shake off such hateful shackles of indifference. Now, for those who want to do a bit more than pressuring candidates to be pro-life and supporting those that are, there is a little you can do which is a lot more effective. With just a little more effort, you can actually make sure there are candidates like that in the running. When political parties choose their candidates, there is usually between 50 to 100 people in the room making that decision. And it's not unusual for the contest between a candidate with great Christian convictions and a candidate like Malcolm Turnbull to come down to a mere handful of votes. There is far more power and influence in being one voice among 100 than one voice among 58,000. It is therefore critically important that you become a member of one of the major parties, even if you don't usually vote for them. Remember, even as party members, we owe no party or person loyalty in the privacy of the ballot box, and we must always remain undecided until the final candidates are presented by each party. It may just be, and is not at all rare, that an unlikely party fields a superior candidate to the party we've traditionally supported. So party membership is not an obligation upon you as much as it is an opportunity to help that party consistently put forward the calibre of candidate which you can support. For decades, leftists and cultural Marxists have been infiltrating universities and media and churches and political parties, and it's a generational approach of patience that is paying dividends for them now as the silent majority wonders what happened. It's time we got smarter and played to win instead of playing nice. The rules are clearly published and there for all to see. So get in the game instead of observing mutely from the sidelines. We can and must infiltrate the major political parties and take them back if we really are the majority, if democracy really should be representative. Having said that, in New South Wales, you also have the blessing of an upper house, the Legislative Assembly, which can keep the government formed by any of the major parties honest and just and accountable. In my opinion, the best way to assure this is to vote in the upper house for minor conservative parties such as the Christian Democrats, the DLP or the Conservatives, or anybody else that fits the bill. Again, don't just assume their Christian convictions. Write to them and ask them, or come along to a meeting and hear them. Ask them about the deal-breaker issues under constant attack by regressive political agendas. Life, liberty and family. Make sure those candidates, not automatically the party you belong to, get your donations and your volunteer efforts. We are the people of God. We have His word as our guide, our primary filter for knowing right from wrong and what our government should do. We, the church, are neither the master nor the servant of the state, but we are the conscience of the state. When there was a change of government in ancient Israel and David became king, among the numbers of men who came to turn the kingdom over to him were the men of the tribe of Issachar, who were described as men who understood the times and knew what the nation should do. In a free democracy like ours, which is a product of Christian convictions among our own founding fathers, legislators and jurists, as well as those of America and England, every election is a time that requires men and women who understand the times and know what the nation should do. That knowledge of the times requires some minimal active involvement once or twice a year for a few hours and taking a long-term interest in the outcomes as demonstrated by the Good Samaritan. With a little diligence, we can understand the dangers of liberalising abortion, euthanasia, gender theory curriculums like safe schools, anti-family laws and anti-freedom laws like 18C. The task before us is immense, but it is not beyond us. 10 spies saw the promised land and saw an impossible task. You remember Joshua and Caleb's names, though, because they saw exactly the same enemies and obstacles, but reported, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." You can do this. You can email every candidate in your electorate and volunteer a few hours for the best one. You can join a major political party and help choose the best candidates for pre-selection, most likely to actually have the power of being part of the government or opposition. The city might be walled. The occupants might be hairy and ugly giants, but we should go up at once and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. And our Christian love for our neighbours compels us to do no less. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, Dave. That was fantastic, thank you. Really appreciated that. Now, you've got some things online that you can sign up to that would mean people can actually hear more about what you've got to say, is that correct?
My name is actually going to be a good Google term, David Pellowe, Dave Pellowe, but PellowTalk.com is my website. There's lots of interviews there. There's a couple of interviews with Martin there that are absolutely riveting. I always appreciate getting to speak before him. And with a little bit of luck, there'll be an interview with Sophie up there soon as well. But lots of articles and interviews and hopefully good resources for guides. There's one of my proudest interviews is one with a world infamous abortionist. That was a real opportunity. I didn't know that I was going to have an interview with her, and I did. And that was kind of nervous because I'm not an expert debater, but she's an expert lobbyist for abortion. And it's really crazy the kind of dumb things they say. I don't think the interview went too badly, actually. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's possible to sign up on your smartphone right now?
Absolutely. Yep. Mobile-friendly website.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you.